Welcome back, everybody. You're watching or listening to 914 Wired, which is a community affairs podcast where we talk about politics, education, and culture. Ardina, what else do we talk about on here? All kinds of stuff.
You name it. Some
Yeah.
censored, but no, I'm only kidding.
We talk about flooding. We talk about anti-Semitism. We talk about, you name it. If it's going on out there, we try to bring it in here.
Right.
And so a little quick housekeeping item here. If you are watching the show on YouTube, click the subscribe button, and that way you can find out when there's future episodes coming out. If you're listening to the podcast on one of these popular podcast platforms, make sure you click follow for the same reason. So, Ardina, our guest today is Damaris Moné. I'm acquainted with Damaris from Mount Vernon. I first got to know you when you were working on an election campaign for one of the mayoral candidates over there a couple of years ago. But there's a new Damaris, and the new Damaris has a career in the art world. And I want to talk about that with you. So welcome to the show, and thank you for being our guest, Damaris Moné.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's great to be here with you and Ardina. It's been a very interesting journey since we first met. Absolutely.
How does one make that move? So tell us a little bit about that phase of your life and what you were doing at that point. And because you were active in community affairs and you're kind of a city hall person, I gather, at one point in Mount Vernon. Did you run for library trustee at one point?
I did. I have run for office.
So you're kind of a civic-minded individual and community-minded and community-oriented. I gather you still are. But at some point there was a transition to art. Tell us how that came about.
So I had always wanted to be a creative person. Even as a child, I wanted to be an artist. But it was not actually something that was respected or supported in my family at that point. My mother was more like, become a professional, that's what you're going to do. And so I did. So when
what did she want you to be?
Well, it wasn't so much that I think she had a specific profession in mind, in as much as she didn't want me to be a starving artist, right? She didn't, knowing what the challenges are. Now, as a child, what I did not understand is that she helped and witnessed her own sister go through that process, right? So by the time I came along, as her daughter, she was concerned of that life, right? And the struggles that many artists do find themselves being, because a lot of people do not understand the amount of hours that it really does go into creating things. And a lot of people just don't want to pay for that time, right? Yeah. And so, which is why now we have so many, manufacturing by using not only just computerized systems, but manufacturing of using tools and, larger manufacturing, or now all of that has been shipped to other countries where labor is less, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Idea for you to be able to make a profit. And so a lot of artists, you spend a lot of that time. And so throughout the ages, every major artist, whether it's Leonardo da Vinci, he had the church that helped support him, right? Every artist had to have somebody who had supported them.
A sponsor.
Financially, patrons, right?
Right.
And so, when I went to college, and I had always been an advocate, even in high school, where I had a voice, and I had learned very early that I had a voice, and I needed someone to be my advocate. When I found that there wasn't, I became my own advocate, and then I began to advocate for other people. And so that was kind of always part of my personality of who I was. So when I did go to college and I studied ethnic American literatures, I as well studied environmental science. So by the time I did come out of college, I did begin to work in those areas. I worked in publishing, and I also worked in energy efficiency and environmental programs, and just that background. Mm-hmm. In that process, because I had a friend that I had known in college, they remembered me, and they remembered the advocacy because I was also a student body president. I was also a student senator. I was also part of the United States Student Association, so I traveled around advocating for student rights, funding for whether it's Pell Grants or government fundings. I'm it was a very tiring weekend. So my brain is like what
Take
are
your
you
time. Take your time.
doing
We're
today?
not on a. It's not a race, Damaris. Take your time. But at this point, you're going to college. You're achieving big things. You're doing important work. Mom is pretty proud of you.
So
Must be.
yes, and but at that point, I didn't study art, so it wasn't like I was going to become an artist because I was under this belief that in order to be an artist, you had to have gone to art school, you had to have been studied, you had to be under these, tutelage of these great people that taught you the process, right? Not really understanding creativity comes from within, right?
Yep.
And you just hope that you'll find your own people that like your stuff,
Yep.
And I recall like sometime back a couple of years ago, I met Nina Simone's brother, and because they had recently renamed one of our streets Nina Simone Way, and I was having a conversation with him.
Because Nina Simone lived in Mount Vernon at some point, right?
Yes, she did.
Right.
And I had asked, and her brother had shared with me that she was so afraid that no one was going to like her work, that no one was going to like her art. But she decided to do art anyways, and she was going to do it her way,
Yeah.
right? And if she had not, we wouldn't have had Nina Simone, right?
That's right.
And so I remembered that in my mind, and I kind of was like, just get over it. Like, okay, so you didn't go to art school. It's okay. But anyways, going back and forth, so one of the students that I had gone to college with actually ended up becoming an elected official, and they recalled my advocacy and that I understood what the issues were and that I had a voice. So at which point...
And did you already say, where did you go to school?
I went to Queens College.
Got it. Okay.
So I was recruited to become an advocate, and as such. So hence, I began working on policy in the state assembly. I was together. We were one of the first people that began to pass environmental policy at that time. I began working on policy to pass to incentivize green roofs because particularly in certain areas in New York City, there aren't a lot of green areas.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were trying to find ways that the community can have green spaces as well as the environmental benefits of what green roofs have done. So we were able to pass that policy. And through that, I found myself more and more in politics, even being one of 4 people with the governor of New York State, discussing environmental policy. And so I worked...
And if I may ask, just sort of a frame of reference here, which governor was that?
At that time, it was Governor David Patterson.
Okay.
Patterson.
And so, and then from there, we eventually ended up, being in the New York State Senate. And so I've worked on, communications. I've worked on constituent services. I've worked on operations. I've worked on policy. I've even lived in Albany where we helped work on drafting policy to what best serves the people, right? Not just what made us feel good. It was really about serving the people.
So you are a person who understands all kinds of public policy issues. You mentioned a couple of environmental ones, but if you spent time, in a state senator's office or in a governor's office, there is probably no issue you didn't touch at some point.
Right, correct.
And all the while, I want to kind of bring this back to art. There's this tickle inside your brain that you were interested in picking up a brush.
Yes.
Or did that come later?
So that started about 9 years ago, and I think it was around an era where adult coloring books had started hitting the market. Right?
I do remember that. Yes. Yeah,
right?
yeah. My daughter was into that.
So my son had purchased me as a gift. It was not necessarily a coloring book, but it was kind of like an accordion card, right?
Yeah.
And it had like an entire fairy background. And I took a few months, coloring in with pencils, and I was really enjoying that whole process of working with color.
Mm-hmm.
And then I began to feel like, well, I started coloring in other things, but I began feeling like why am I doing other people's work? Why aren't I coloring in my own work? And why aren't I creating from my own mind and ideas so that I'm not doing somebody else's stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And So I began, I started off painting family portraits, right? Meaning photos of family members that I had, and then I started making paintings off of those pictures.
Okay, so or is that what would you call that, like a photo illustration, or it's just an illustration based on a photo?
I think would be an illustration based off of a photo.
Yeah. Okay.
And due to my not going to, taking art classes, I don't recall, I wouldn't know what all the terminology is.
Mm-hmm.
I hope to continue learning. But what I had started to do is I had started to paint, and I was doing watercolors. I had moved into doing some watercolor painting because it was easy. They weren't large tubes. You didn't have to occupy all this space in your house, kind of a scenario. And then I just kept going on to different mediums as far as trying different mediums as to what had really stuck with me, whether it was pencils, whether it was markers, and really just kind of, I want to say, like trying to figure out what my niche was, what medium I really had preferred. Because people will do that. You could sculpt and then they could paint, or they can, make jewelry. And so again, it's in, everybody has what their interests would be. And so for me, I began enjoying working with gouache, which is a darker, more pigmented than watercolors. And then from there, I was doing that. And then, if you recall, the blue wave came.
Okay. Which year are we thinking blue wave here?
So now the blue wave of 2018,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
When the blue wave of 2018 came in,
This is the blue wave after the Trump wave.
right? The blue wave as a result of the Trump wave, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
When New York State had decided to get rid of the IDC, right?
Right. Right.
I was working for the members of the IDC. We were all Democrats, which was really kind of mind blowing as to the narrative that went around that whole scenario.
Yep.
I served communities that had been neglected for decades, and I worked for members that were like, listen, just following one party line was not helping our constituents. It was about, making and working with everybody and working across the aisles in the hopes of being able to pass great policy for New York. I mean, through the members that I worked with, we passed medicinal marijuana. We passed Family Paid Leave Act. Eventually, the DREAM Act was passed here in New York. I worked for all these members, the Speed Zone Camera Act. So I worked on all these different types of policies. I worked for the elected officials that have passed these policies. So I was very proud of what that work was.
Right.
But come to 2018, when they lost their elections, at that time, I was also personally going through the process of feeling that there was something physically wrong with my health, that there was something going on. And so after we had lost the election, I then had some time, because now we were not running around as much, because we were now going to be out of office. So we were no longer having to come up with policy ideas. We were no longer able to necessarily pick up big constituent cases to help the slew of people. I mean, we moved mountains at this point.
Right. But at this point, there had been this progressive swing. Jeff Klein lost his election.
Jose Peralta lost his election.
There's a woman from the Bronx who I know you know.
Lost her election.
Marisol lost her election. All happened at one time. The progressive caucus, for lack of a better term, decided that they had it with the IDC, and a bunch of people lost their elections. But there's a story that I think is not as visible, and it's yours. There's a whole bunch of people that do a lot of the legwork in these legislative offices that you don't see on a daily basis, unless you're actually asking for something. You might not know that there's a legislative expert behind the scenes that has to actually stick their nose in the law books and figure out what to do.
Right.
And you're one of those people, and so it's 2018. This is such a fascinating story. So what was it like in those weeks and months after the election and before January inaugurations happened?
So it was very sad. It was because as staffers, as a team, we knew the amount of work that we had done. We knew the dedication. I mean, year after year, I lost comp time, hundreds of hours that I had dedicated that I was not paid for, that we did to work to help, constituents. I mean, I had such cases where I had a constituent who was originally from Australia. She never had never had any children. She had no family. She began developing dementia, and I took on the case because my mother had dementia. So I felt very bad. I was able to then find this woman's family, track her family down in Australia,
Wow.
and then to be able to get her family in contact, and then be able to get her to be provided, excuse me,
Provided
adult,
with services.
adult protective services and such. And so those were a lot of the cases that we were always doing. That these were the big cases, because by the time people came into our office, they had been dealing with their problems for so long that they did not realize that they could come into an elected official's office to seek assistance or guidance, right?
Yep.
To find a solution to what it is. And so that's what we were always doing. We were always solving community issues, and then as well as providing services and events for the community to enjoy. And a lot of people didn't realize that all the concerts that were thrown on behalf of Jeff Klein and the IDC in the Bronx and in Mount Vernon, Jeff Klein paid for that. The state government did not pay for that, right? But a lot of the community did not realize that all of those extra benefits that they were getting was because of the member, right? Because he was so dedicated to the community, because he, you know what I mean? And the same thing with Jose Peralta, because I had worked for Jose. And we used to have an annual backpack giveaway for, every school year. We used to give out 3,000 backpacks every year, right? No other elected official was able to come up with that, right? And as a single, but that he was able to do that because he had such a dedicated staff members that we went out on our own time after work. We stored the backpacks in our cars. We all gathered the stuff, and then we would all put it all together on our time, right? Because that was, because that knew that was how dedicated they were. So we were as equally dedicated to the community.
Ardina, did you have a question?
Yeah, I think the thing is, I want to ask you about how much art you were able to do at the time that you were working in politics, and if some of your art that we see now has a veiled reference to politics or to the political experiences that you had while you were working in that world.
That it's interesting that you say that. So yes and no. So at the time when I was not able to do as much as I would have wanted to do, right? Because and that was really kind of like my downtime for me to paint, just to kind of shed the day's stress. So I would get like maybe an hour to 2 hours a day where I was able to paint. Whereas now I'm painting 10, 12 hours a day, right?
Wow.
It's a significant difference in my ability to paint. I will say in regards to any of the political, sometimes, as far as my writings, I would say whether it's poetry or whether it are sketches that I've done will have maybe some little political or past traumas, even childhood traumas that have come through some of my drawings. But as of late, I've been trying to be a lot more positive and uplifting. But a lot of my beginning drawings that I had done, a lot of them I had started off making phoenixes. And it was kind of like I was going through a whole new rebirth. And so at the time, I was very much attracted. I'm also a fire sign, right? So I would be attracted to a phoenix and the fire and the whole mythology behind that whole process. And particularly because what had happened was after we had lost the election, and as I was saying, I now had time to seek, because I realized that I had been very tired, that there was something going on. And as a result, that now that I had time to go to the doctor's office and have all these tests done, because I did not take that time, I did not have that amount of time beforehand due to our dedication to the community. Now I had that time for myself. That is when I then was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so I had lost both my political career. I mean, not my political career, but I had lost my public service career and diagnosed with cancer. And so after that, I then began obviously turning to doing more art as a way to heal.
Mhm.
And I very much found it very healing. It helped me de-stress. It helped a lot of, I guess, the emotional ping pong, right? That was kind of like going on um, between, why did this happen? A dedicated career suddenly gone, and then a diagnosis of cancer. But then I found my time in my new love affair for art. And so there's times that I'm like, it saved my life. I actually even told Alessandra Biaggi once that I was like, losing the election actually saved my life.
Hmm.
Because I'm not sure if we had not lost the election, I would not have had that time, that downtime, to then start going to the doctors to find out what was going on with my body.
Right, because you
So,
had a lifestyle prior to that was very stressful and very demanding from a time perspective, and so it sounds like things were really resetting as a result of the diagnosis, the career path change, all that.
correct.
Damaris, if you have no objection, one of the things I wanted to talk about is you opened a online art gallery and store with
Yeah,
your work. Would it be okay if I put it on the screen?
sure, please do. Sure.
All right, let's do
Elia
that.
Monet.
ateliermonet.com, ateliermone.com, and I will put that into the show notes so that people who are listening to this can
Great.
look at it. So this is some of your work,
Yeah.
and in your description, you refer to flowism and eccentric lines. What does that tell us? What that means?
And so when I refer to flowism, it was really kind of like just let it flow, let it go. So those, I have a series of paintings that I've not posted on the website that is definitely more flowism. But the ones that
Are,
you just asked with the eccentric lines and
oh,
all
those are
these
eccentric
lines,
lines. Okay.
that series was passages, and so a lot of that I think came out of everything that had come from the political world, right? All
Right.
these different avenues that opened and closed,
I
and
see.
the passages that we all take in life, right? The large avenues and small streets, and so that's what I was really kind of feeling that I was channeling. The other items, the line items that you up above, those are the ones that I had called eccentric line designs.
Should I scroll up?
Yeah, if you scroll up, so you see those. Yeah, as you scroll up, those are actually a single line. Oh, you passed them. If you,
Wait, this one right here?
yeah, if you keep going up, go down to one that's called running horses.
Running horses. Where are you?
There you
There
go.
it is. Okay.
So
Let's
if
bring that
you
up.
if you want, you can click onto it. So all of this particular series is actually a single line,
Yep.
right?
So
So that
you
one,
put down the brush and it keeps going continuously throughout the entire piece.
correct. So in this
Wow.
particular one, I started off with a very thin marker, and then I do have a video on it where I show it on my Instagram, the process that I do in this particular piece. So these are eccentric line designs in which some people see, they're like almost my ink blots, because some people see something else, right? I know what I saw, so I pull out the colors within the design of what I see. And so here I have what I call there's 6 running horses. There's different colors that I represented the different horses. And so with me, the idea of flowism versus cubism, it was kind of like just really let it flow. And so I have some other pieces that are currently not on the website. I'm going to be debuting in September, actually, at another art fair that I'm going to be doing.
Okay.
Um, and then they'll eventually be going up on the website as well.
And I
And
should mention
so,
you just finished up an art exhibit at the Lyndhurst Castle that finished up this weekend, right?
yes,
Ah,
That's
it
great.
was absolutely fantastic. I was given the opportunity of what had happened was I was began to be informed of what different art fairs that are happening around in the area, and so I applied. I applied to 7 opportunities. I was accepted to 4 out of the 7, and then I took 3 on because I realized like I'm new to this. I've never been a vendor. I mean, I've gone to conferences where I
Hmm.
sat at a booth, right? But I
Right.
didn't have to set up the tent and bring all the stuff and
And
price.
now you're doing that. Now you're doing that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So I had we
Right.
had my kids helped me. We put up a tent and we lined up the artwork so that I can have my originals shown. I set up my computer system so that people could see, because the reason why I had started the online website was because so that you can um as a patron, you
Hmm.
can choose how you want to customize that piece of art that
right,
you want,
Okay.
because I could only create one design, right? I mean, it's only going to be one piece,
right.
it's only going to be one size, right? Whereas here, you can now select it smaller, larger. You can choose what type of quality, whether you want it on canvas or you want it on paper.
I
Hmm.
noticed that on the site. So then, how that work? If I make those choices, then you're going to custom create something
So
based
yeah,
on that.
so it goes through
Right.
my website to my
Right.
third party vendor, and at which
Okay.
Ah,
they'll put it
okay.
all together and then they'll ship it to you. So
Very
no matter
nice.
where you are
Wow.
in the world or in the country, you could go through the website and you could customize any of the pieces of art that I have put up, and including I have yoga mats and I even created some phone cases because to me those items are very dull. I mean,
Hmm.
everybody they're either just blue or they're pink or they're
Yeah.
black, right? There's no, or they're crazy designs that I'm like, that's maybe a little too much when it comes to cell phone cases. So
That's very smart. That's a commercial application, which brings back all the way to what you said at the very beginning, which is in time memoriam, artists have been starving,
right,
but you've figured out a way to combine commerce with art. You're an entrepreneur. You are a artist now. I guess if I pushed it, you probably could be a political commentator too. And
yes, I've done that as well.
and
Yes,
I should also mention that somewhere along the way I saw you at a event where you were doing a cooking demonstration.
yes. So I last 2 years I had started an annual Puerto Rican Heritage Month event here in the city of Mount Vernon. A couple of years ago, well, back in 1996, Rudolph Giuliani had actually declared November Puerto Rican Heritage Month in the city of New York. And then in 2022, the Puerto Rican community here in New York, and I think particularly Westchester County, pushed Kathy Hochul to declare November Puerto Rican Heritage Month. And so I know that Puerto Ricans live in Mount Vernon, but it's almost as if it's unheard of. People don't know that we're here. And so I wanted to make sure that I hosted an event to I don't want to say to educate, but to introduce people to other Americans, right? Because
Right.
Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, and a lot of people are
Of course.
unaware of that, right? They're
Yep.
unaware of our contributions. They're unaware of
It was a
um,
great it
our own.
was a great cultural event, and that's exactly what it accomplished. And you did a cooking demo. There were other things there as well, but you did a cooking demo, and I recall it was funny because you said, "I'm not a chef. I'm not a chef. I'm not an expert." But I was a mom for over 20 years, so I had to cook every day.
Right, right, right. Absolutely.
It doesn't get more honest than
But
that.
the idea of
So
the cooking event, and I'm real quick on that because I know we have other questions. But the idea was to teach, to show people that you can make a healthy meal on a hot plate, right? Because
Yeah.
we have
right,
a lot of families here in the city of Mount Vernon that may not have a stove, right? Or maybe they're renting a room, right? So really, depending on their scenario, I wanted to be able to show people that they could cook a very delicious, tasty meal.
Yeah.
And so I cooked two traditional plates, and one was what we call it would have been a chicken stew, but a pollo guisado, and then as well as arroz con gandules, and that would be kind of like rice and peas. And so I did that with the hopes, to bring people together, and food has a tendency to do that, to bring us together. And so that's what I wanted. So the idea is we do a little art, we do a little discussion, political and cultural discussion about, what's happening in Puerto Rico, last year we discussed.
You had some local important Puerto Rican people there telling
Yes.
their stories, and it was quite an interesting event. And you definitely you came across with a great cooking demo, and it was very practical. Because it's like this wasn't something that you can't imagine how in the world you'd ever cook it. This is what people cook for dinner,
Right.
in the real world. So thank you for telling us your story. I want to leave off with one little thing. Ardina, this showed up in the mail. Let's see if you guys can see
This is a story
this.
without results, and that is regarding.
There you go.
I see
This
George
is-
Latimer there, and
So it's a great big George Latimer mailing. It's a huge thing. I mean, it's just
wow, that's
Wow.
Tremendous.
Yeah,
Wow.
I haven't received that one yet.
4-page, full
4
color
pages.
thing, and it's got the exact same colors and photos that he's using online and the Facebook advertising. It's a fairly I would say expensive endeavor, right, to run for
Right.
Congress and to produce mailers that look like this. But I noticed something very interesting about it, which is that nowhere in this document, it's a fairly long thing, nowhere does it say the date of the primary, which is June 25th.
Right.
Oh,
So I'm curious if anything stands out to you about the absence of the date, Ardina or Damaris.
It may. That's a good question, because it could just be an issue of graphics,
Yeah.
which I doubt, but it could also just be an issue of wanting to get as much information out there as possible without having to take a separate section and say the primary is June 25th.
Okay.
I think that's
Damaris, do you have an idea?
all right. So this is where I'm like, I feel like I'm going to need witness protection after this interview with you, Charles.
I think I know what you're going to say.
I have a question. So,
Yep.
Are you sure it's a political mailer and not it came from the county?
Okay, paid for by George Latimer for Congress.
Okay. So it definitely came out of their campaign. So either the consultant screwed up, because if it came from the campaign, a primary date would have absolutely been on that. Now, if it was not paid by the campaign and it was kind of like public funding kind of scenario, then I could see why they would have not had a date on there.
a great point.
Paid for by George Latimer for
It's
Congress.
absolutely a political mailer. So
No
I
question.
would definitely say their consultant screwed up on that mailer. And
Great
consider
point.
the amount of money that was spent on that is a huge loss of opportunity and money. But
So I have a third alternative possibility. Ardina shared one. Damaris, you shared another idea. I have a third idea on why the date is not listed.
but
Because without the date, they can use the same mailer for the general election.
well,
I don't know about that. I think that they'd be called out on that. I mean, in theory, you have
That's
a
got to
point.
be what it is.
I mean,
That's got to be what it is.
Charlie, I'll agree with you in that sense, because that would make great, smart sense in the sense from you're trying to save money, right?
Right.
I get that. But typically, right before a primary, no, that's the least of their concerns, because they
Exactly.
want people to know the date that they have to come out to vote, right?
Yeah.
Because
Right.
This is the most important thing. Now, whether they, I don't know how many they would have printed out, but if they mailed it out, then yeah, I'm gonna leave it with, I think the consultant screwed up.
Yeah. Plus, you got to look at the fact. I mean, politics changes, circumstances flip on a dime.
Right.
So between now and the actual election, anything could happen. So for them to
Yeah.
use that same flyer could be kind of dicey if, God forbid, there's some sort of, horrible terrorist event, or if, who knows. But you're not
It's a
going to you're not going to use the
it's a
same
pretty
thing.
generic piece in terms of its content. It's fairly generic. That's why they call it politics, because there's as many opinions as you can possibly have. There
Yeah,
are
Exactly.
out there.
as a consultant myself, a political consultant who's worked on campaigns, who's
Yeah.
actually even drafted, did the graphics for mailers.
Pre-primary, you'd put the date.
The date is like,
Yeah. I thought the same thing. Okay, maybe not to the scale that you've worked on them, but I've worked on these kinds of things. Before the primary, you put the date.
you put
Exactly.
Before the election,
You gotta
before
have
the
the
election, you
date
put the
in there.
date. Which,
Yeah.
again, it's just, this is my opinion. You don't have to agree with me, but I think
yeah,
they're ready, and
yeah.
they may think that
But I mean,
you can fill in the rest of that sentence.
yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
They also know that the people that they sent it to should know the date. Maybe they're making an assumption, but we still have
Yeah.
time for the primary. We're all going to get new mailers, and I'm sure.
No, that's a good point, Damaris. They may have sent it only to primary voters, because the recipient on this one is my son, and I believe he's a registered Democrat. So they may be sending it. I don't know. I don't know. I don't have the answer, but it's an interesting one. So, Damaris Moné, thank you for spending a few minutes talking to us today. Very interesting to hear your story about, your life and how things have changed for you, and events that really caused you to reset and rethink. And it sounds like you really are able to derive a great deal of personal satisfaction from art, and beautify the world a little bit as well. So good luck with your online store. Good luck with your art endeavors. Ardina, I think that's going to wrap it up for
Yes, indeed.
914 Wired. Damaris, thank you again for being our guest.
Huepa.
Very much for the invite, and you made me feel like a real life phoenix. And on one last note, because I've been joking about it with my family, and I realized that I've actually sold more paintings while alive than Vincent van Gogh did.
Wow.
Okay.
So, because if you know the story about Vincent van Gogh, he unfortunately never sold a piece while he was alive, and his brother was an art dealer. And so it wasn't until long after Vincent van Gogh had died that he was able, that people began to buy his pieces.
Right.
And then my aunt was like, "Hush, you don't say that." I'm like, "Well, Vincent cut off an ear, and I
Right.
cut off, and I had something else cut
Okay.
off." So I was like,
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway,
Thank you, Damaris. Well, Vincent van Gogh wasn't making, cell phone cases, and he didn't have the benefit of an online store.
That's
So
true. That's true. Absolutely, he did not have that benefit, and so, but I take his story seriously of understanding the challenges that artists have had, and so, you realize that knowing his life,
Yeah.
and tell other artists that's Vincent van Gogh. So don't be so hard on yourself.
it's a
All
journey.
right. Well, thank you, Damaris.
Be well.
so
Thanks
much.
again.
Have a good evening.
Okay. Okay.